Thank you so much, and welcome to the Climate Center's webinar, Maximizing Investments in Maximizing Benefits from Climate Investments. My name is Duran. I'm a program manager at the Climate Center. I'd like to welcome all of you who are signing in. I'm going to do a quick share screen and do some little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to our speakers. And I see that Dan Adler is with us and all our speakers are present. Nice to see you, Dan. Thank you for being here. And we look forward to your presentation in just a little bit. So let me go ahead and do this and we'll get started. Well, pardon me. All right. So you are indeed at the Climate Center's webinar, part of our Investing in Climate Action for Jobs, Health, and Equity webinar series. We're very happy you could join us here today. My name is Duran. I'm a program manager with the Climate Center. And today's webinar on maximizing benefits is part of our current webinar series on investments. I do want to mention that there are more webinars coming up. Investing in Sustainable Mobility will be in January. Investing in Workers for a Fossil Fuel-Free World will be in February. And webinars throughout next year will cover investing in community energy resilience, investing in farmers, and more. So I'm going to ask Nina, my colleague, to drop a link in the chat so you guys can see what some of the other webinars are. And we thank you for being here and hope you will join us for the rest of the webinars. Of course, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for the support of our many sponsors and promotional partners. So I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, River City Bank, Summit State Bank, Willow Creek Wealth Management. These people all deal in money and they know how important this topic is today. Y Green Energy Fund, Blue Planet Energy, Terra Verde, and MCE Clean Energy and Peninsula Clean Energy, all of whom are working hard in this space to help bring about a clean and climate safe future for California and the world. Our promotional partners are also a key part of bringing you all here. Some of you heard about it from the Climate Center. Some of you heard about this through the work of Clean Coalition, the Better World Group, Joint Venture Silicon Valley, Climate Resolve, Acterra, Local Government Commission, Center for Sustainable Energy, and the California League of Environmental Voters. So all of these organizations share our vision of a climate safe future. And I really want to thank all of them and all of you for being here. So our first speaker today is the CEO of the Climate Center. She's going to help us frame this discussion and understand how this fits into the context of climate safe California. It's my pleasure to work with Ellie Cohen. I'm happy to introduce her to you. Ellie, why don't you get us started?
Thanks so much. Welcome, everybody. And I love working with you, Duran, and our whole team and all of our partners. I'm just going to frame some of the conversation today, just to remind everybody that our current global climate goals are inadequate. A lot of the goals being set today are based on the UN 1.5C report from October 2018, 3 years ago, which in essence said we have to cut emissions in half by 2030, remove up to 1 trillion tons of climate pollutants from the atmosphere that we already put there to stay within a supposed safe range. The UN operates by consensus. These goals are inherently conservative and they're not enough based on the latest science and the reality we're actually experiencing. It is code red for humanity. And global climate models don't include these regional extremes that we've been seeing more and more of over the past 6 to 10 months. And things are rapidly deteriorating in the climate system. We know no temperature rise is safe, that this rapidly warming climate that we have driven is the greatest threat to global public health, and that we expect to pass 1.5C, that dangerous warming threshold, by 2030. Some say in California by 2027, much earlier than originally projected in that report. And I just want to remind everybody, I was with Dan and others in Glasgow, and one of the presentations I heard was from a professor, Tim Lenton, who devised this concept of negative global tipping points. And there are 15 of them. We know 9 of them have already been activated. And one of the things he said in his talk was to remind us that when we think of we're at 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius warming now, the difference between 1.2 to 1.3 or 1.3 to 1.4 is significant. Every 1/10 of a degree means that much larger of extreme events. It's you think more earthquake scale rather than linear. And so we know that warming has doubled since the first Conference of the Parties of the United Nations in 1994, and it's likely to double even faster over the next 10 to 20 years. And so, as I said, all the pledges of the countries of the world together still put us in really catastrophic climate chaos. We need to do more now. We had elected officials from California there, and even our Speaker of the Assembly said, we are behind in California. There's much more that we can do. And so we know that climate inaction and delay can bankrupt our economy. And with the Federal Reserve has finally required last year that banks consider climate risk. We know that there are threats to the insurance and mortgage markets, to pension funds and other financial institutions. The fires in 2018 alone cost $150 billion to damages locally and really way beyond the footprint of the fire. And we know that that's 2/3 of the state budget, really significant, but those same funds invested in a clean energy future can generate hundreds of thousands of new jobs. Investing in greenhouse gas reduction creates those jobs. And I won't go into all this detail right now, but just to say, like, we know that investing big now will save dollars and lives. And we know the nation and the world are looking to California to lead for a climate safe future. We need more aggressive, equitable policies and accelerated timelines now. We developed the Climate Safe California campaign so that by 2025, we will have in place the bold, equitable policies required by science to dramatically cut emissions, start drawdown of past pollution, and secure resilient communities for everybody, inspiring global action. We know 2045 is too late. We want to move it up to 2030 to get to net negative or carbon negative. And as Professor Pasteur has said, equity positive by 2030, including nature-based annual sequestration. The kinds of policies required are the phase out of fossil fuel development, production, and use, scaling up nature-based sequestration, investing in community resilience, including clean energy, microgrids, and storage, and funding climate action so that we can unleash innovation and direct markets to do much, much more in the direction that's needed to secure life on our planet. Our guiding principles is it's got to be based on the latest science. We have to ensure a just transition for fossil fuel workers, their families, and their communities. And we have to prioritize climate justice, which we believe is racial justice, and ensure that lower income and BIPOC communities are no longer disproportionately harmed by fossil fuel production and use, and that these communities have equal access to climate solutions. So we invite you to endorse Climate Safe California. You can go to climatesafeca.org, and I think Nina will put it in the chat if you haven't yet. And we really can remove more climate pollution than we're emitting. We have to get on it soon, and California can lead again to inspire others to global action and secure a climate safe future for everyone. Back to you, Duran.
Thank you, Ellie. That's an inspiring little rundown of Climate Safe California. And I just want to echo Ellie's request that if you have not yet done so, you consider joining almost 1,500 other elected officials, climate scientists, business leaders, and folks like yourself who have endorsed Climate Safe California. There's the link. Check it out and join this movement. I'm really excited to go to our first speaker. I just want to mention, if you have questions, and I see questions are already coming in, please drop them in the Q&A. You can also use the chat, but we do prefer the Q&A. That way we can answer some of those questions for you, especially, for example, the question, will the PowerPoints be made available? The answer is yes, along with the recording of this presentation. So let's go to our first speaker. Professor Dan Kammen's going to talk about where we need to go and how are we going to get there. Very briefly, Professor Kammen is a professor at UC Berkeley at the Energy and Resources Group, where I'm a proud graduate of also. Also currently an advisor, senior advisor for energy climate innovation for USAID. If you want to see his full bio, Nina will drop a link in the chat and you can go to that. But rather than take more time telling you about how wonderful he is, I'm just going to turn the mic over to Dan to let him do his presentation. So Dan, take it away.
My thanks for having me on, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It really is code red for humanity and for justice right now. And so I will try to just run through quite briefly some of the really overwhelming arguments that not only should we do it, but that we can do it and that we would do it in a job and justice positive way. And that's often been the sort of sticking point in the arguments. Anything I say, including my slides, will be available both on the Climate Center's website, but also the website of my laboratory here at UC Berkeley. It's called RAIL, the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Lab. And I'll also put up some links to it on Twitter, and you can see the Twitter handle is down below. And I just want to start with the op-ed that Professor Manuel Pastor and I wrote earlier this year, highlighting the story that the science and the technology and the jobs and the justice arguments all clearly align, not around 2045, but on a much sooner goal. When the governor in the late summer was running against the recall, he actually said and committed to moving the date forward to 2035. We need to see the guts of that. But 2035 is still not quick enough. And in fact, there would be more benefits by moving it forward to 2030. And that's not just moving the numbers forward, that's taking advantage of the alignment of science, technology, policy, and justice. We all know, or hopefully know, that California's first clean energy goal was to be 20% powered by renewables by 2010. We missed that goal. We hit it in 2013. But the pace of progress, the pace of deploying the cost declines in solar and wind and energy storage in particular, meant that California far exceeded its 2020 goal. We routinely operate well over 40% renewables. That enabled us in California to redo the 2030 goal that was 50% to be a goal for 60% by 2030. And that was when the 2045 carbon neutrality goal was set. That is now out of date technically, jobs and justice-wise. And many of the pieces are things that have proven far easier to do than any of the naysayers said. We worked for 7 years with the Public Utilities Commission to get the rule changed so that every new home built in California had to be a net carbon neutral home, and it generated as much energy as it consumes. Here you can see housing development both for single family homes like the yellow one and multifamily homes like the ones on the top that have solar built in, and hopefully you've all seen these in your neighborhoods. That is a great start. We could have done it earlier. The numbers add up to be cost savings for households. What we didn't do was to make it pro-justice so that renters and low-income people have the same access. That's our opportunity in front of us today. And in fact, if you look at the overall graph of California's carbon emissions, you don't have to look too detailed the numbers, but the brown largest section, we are now dominated by emissions from transportation. 15 years ago, decarbonizing energy looked hard. Now that looks easy. 10 years ago, decarbonizing transport, really mobility. It's not about owning vehicles. It's about getting where you need to go, both you and goods at low carbon. Now that looks actually far easier. And so California's 2045 goal, again, is far out of date. We already set the goal that we would no longer permit the sale of new combustion vehicles by 2035. Since California set that 2035 goal, Massachusetts and the United Kingdom have both set 2030 as their goals, as their set laws for when they would no longer sell internal combustion vehicles, new ones on the market. We need to adopt that as well. I actually think that California should pick 2028, but that's a personal view. And I highlight that because it really illustrates the degree to which, if we don't push and take advantage of the technology changes, many of which California helped to launch, we're really not getting there. Now, I'm not going to go into the math of the models, but one of the points is, can we do it? This is a snapshot of a worldview, not just for California, but across all of the Western states. The black line is demand. The colors hopefully are self-explanatory. Light blue is wind, yellow is solar, the orange is energy that goes into storage. And what we see in the analytics is that 2030 absolutely works given the pace of deployment we could do. But only scientists trust the models that much. When we go in and look at the actual numbers, price of solar has dropped by 90% this decade, wind by 60%. Energy storage, batteries have now dropped by an order of magnitude, factor of 10 over the past decade. That's enabled us to think dramatically differently. And the key lesson that's emerged worldwide is that today it is cheaper to build a new solar or wind power plant than to operate an existing plant. So the arguments that either the models say it's impossible or the actual data says that, they're both false. And that's really why California can jump dramatically ahead. And if we want to look at a perfect example of this, here we have a day from April of this year when renewables were not only 95% of our mix, that's this ramp up of green here, where it's largely solar ramping up during the day with some wind. What you see is that not only were we able to turn down the amount of gas dramatically to zero out the amount of hydro, but California became a net clean energy exporter to our neighboring states. That is a recipe for the jobs equation. That's a recipe for investing in our underserved communities that moving our date forward would enable. And if we can do 95% on a given day in California, the world's 5th largest economy, over the coming decade, we can dramatically move this forward and adopt this data overall. Now, I want to highlight that California already has many of the tools in place. This is not a huge lift. We already have a climate credit. You all see it on your bill. And while there's still a huge amount of debate about the details, the Public Utilities Commission this week announced a so-called NEM, or Net Energy Metering New Structure. There's lots of debates about the numbers, but overall, what the PUC is proposing is that California now de-emphasize just solar, and it emphasizes solar plus storage. The second part of it is there would be a $600 million social justice fund to invest in underserved communities that would largely be managed in terms of where the funds are spent by those communities. That is putting into effect key parts of our current climate law, Senate Bill 32, the Pavley Law. And I highlight this because not only does it say, yes, we can in terms of getting it done, but we now have a mixture of states across the country that are following or even exceeding our model. I mentioned Massachusetts with now a more aggressive vehicle standard. Just California and New York alone account for more than 40% of the national GNP. Both are committed to these 100% clean energy standards. That gives us the right starting ground, and California's businesses, largest vehicle manufacturer Tesla, but also our social justice groups. This is President Biden's April Climate Leaders Summit, where California-based Jennifer Granholm, now Secretary of Energy, but also our social justice groups like GRID, based here in Oakland, California, that invest in clean energy and energy efficiency for low-income families. These are the leaders that we need to be investing in, and that's why California is set up to make it happen. I'll just conclude with a brief comment that we know we have unfortunately gotten the details of the transition or the just transition wrong in a variety of times in the past. We see already that of those families that have solar deployed, they're overwhelmingly white households, and that solar is 30 to 70% less likely to be found on Latinx and African American rooftops. And that's a failing of our ability to take advantage of the jobs and the labor aspects of the story, to get solar onto roofs of broader markets, but also to adapt things so that we can do the same that we do for property owners for renters. There are critical examples around the world. In southern China, the city of Shenzhen converted to a fully electric taxi fleet in 1 year. They use software and apps developed here in California to make it happen. And one of the really important lessons is that things that were touted as huge problems for clean energy, the so-called duck curve, is the worry that we would have so much solar during the day, there'd be very little demand left. And then when demand ramped up in the evenings, we wouldn't be able to meet it. Well, it turns out that that so-called duck curve, that abundance of solar, is perfectly tailored to be used to charge up public vehicle fleets, private vehicles, bus fleets. So the opportunity to learn from what's going on around the world and to re-import those ideas into California are absolutely critical. The final thing I'll say is that President Biden has done California a huge service by requiring that all federal agencies use the so-called social cost of carbon. That's a cost of carbon that reflects climate damage, but also racial damage into the equation. That price is significantly higher. It's more than twice as high as our current market price for carbon here. And we know in California that betting just on the markets is not enough. It's this investment in our environment and in the job creation potential that makes this 2030 goal so workable. So I want to turn it back over to Dora, and I want to thanks for the chance to kick it off. And I really look forward to the questions and comments as we go. So thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Kim, and thank you for those inspiring words. And it's great to have a positive spin on this really knotty problem that we're facing. I think we all understand that it's as much of an opportunity as it is a crisis. So let's talk more about that with Irina Osmundson, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience before we move to our second panel. Irina is the managing director of the California Policy Research Initiative, and she's a policy fellow at Stanford. And I'd also like to mention that for about 8 years, Irina, you were the chief economist at the California Department of Finance. So I think you know of what you speak. We're very interested to hear what you have to say. I'd like to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so much. So I come at this from not the technical side, but from sort of the planning and macroeconomic forecasting side. Before I came back to California, I grew up in California. To work as the chief economist at the California Department of Finance, I was at the International Monetary Fund. And after I left, the International Monetary Fund had calculated that in 2017, the countries of the world were effectively subsidizing the fossil fuel industry to the tune of about $5.2 trillion. So that's a lot of money. And so one of the things that I think that people forget when they're trying to deal with climate and when they're trying to move the needle on this is that every single thing we do has to be consistent with a net zero carbon future. And so, you know, when we go into planning decisions, when we do our forecasting, oftentimes what forecasters do is they say, okay, what's happened for the past 30 years? And what are the trends? And how can I estimate a model to tell me what's going to happen in the future? With climate change, we can't do that anymore. With climate change, you have to completely rethink this. And, you know, the COVID pandemic has been so difficult for so many people, but if there is one silver lining, I think that it's much, much easier to have these conversations about equity. Manuel and I have talked a lot about this in terms of who bears the brunt when bad things happen. And we know that in climate change, there's going to be a lot more risks realized in the future. So do we want to say, okay, well, in our capitalistic system, people are going to become homeless. People are going to have their homes destroyed. People are going to have to, you know, completely upend their lives and reinvest everything. If you're rich and you have savings in the bank, maybe that's kind of a blip. You have some insurance, you deal with that. But for people who have very little slack in their budgets, they completely fall off the wagon. And government is supposed to be the ones who takes care of that and who invests in people and who invests in the society so that we can all do better in the future. And the way we've done this, as I'm sure they're going to talk about a little bit later, is that we just sort of leave everyone to do their own thing. And I don't think that's acceptable. More to the point, we can't have a civilization, we can't have a market economy without more people being helped. Okay, so a couple things about macroeconomic forecasting. Business as usual, a lot of the baselines of all of these scenarios for climate change are based on a comparison with a business as usual baseline. So that means that we sort of keep on doing what we're doing. We sort of do the forecasting thing of, here's what's happened over the last 20 years, so we're going to continue that trend. And that's probably pretty much going to be okay. Right now, that is becoming an increasingly untenable sort of forecast. And it's going to be very, very difficult for everyone to figure that out together. So one of the things that I'm hoping that participants in this climate webinar are going to do is they're going to show up. they're going to challenge those assumptions at every single level of government. When people are doing planning decisions in your local community, are we planting the right kinds of trees? Are we going to have the right kinds of water? Are we going to be able to deal with population growth or population decline? Because California did decline in terms of population last year. Are we going to be able to have the kinds of electricity that we need? Are we going to have the kinds of transportation systems that we need? And because it's so difficult for people to sort of jump to this new scenario, people are going to have to get better at doing these forecasting and doing these alternative scenarios. Part of that is storytelling. Part of that is 20 years in the future, maybe all of our children are going to be adults and they're going to be doing a mixture of work from home or biking to someplace, or they're going to be taking public transportation. Or are we going to all be in traffic again? That's the sort of imagination that you need for these forecasting scenarios. I'm also going to make a comment about the pricing of things. A lot of times economists get knotted up in the, should the price of carbon be $10 a ton, which is clearly too low, or is it going to be $200 a ton, or is it going to be $2,000 a ton? When you know that it's going in a certain direction, then you don't necessarily need to know if it's going to be $19 or $20 per ton. What you need to do is know that it's going to be more expensive in the future than it is now. So if you can do all of your decisions to do avoided harm, so that, for example, if we avoid a whole bunch of emissions in the future and we don't have to rebuild multiple times because there's wildfires going through our community, that's avoided harm. Maybe that's not necessarily on your books right now, but maybe it should start being on your books. Those risks have to be priced in, and those risks do have to be done. Usually that's done through these scenarios of, okay, here's our sort of central scenario. We think that population is going to grow at 1% and our revenues are going to grow at maybe 5% because we're going to get efficiency gains. But we know that probably over the next 10 years, we're going to have 3 massive events and we have to price those in. So do we want to invest right now to avoid some of those risks and move the needle on that? Or do we sort of just deal with it when it happens? That's the kind of practical sort of, everyone needs to be at the table. Everyone needs to be thinking about this when we're telling these stories about forecasting and when we're actually making these plans at every single level, every single day. So that's what I'm very excited about. That's why I left state government to start writing papers at Stanford again, to help people imagine these sorts of things and to put together more of a toolkit so that people can start to reimagine, people can start to bring this, we know we need to do something about the climate, back to, okay, what is my forecast going to be next year? I'm going to stop there because I think that we have some questions.
Thank you, Irina. Yes, we do have a lot of questions. I'd like to bring Professor Kamen back into the conversation. And I'll start this question, I'll start this with you, and then I'd love Professor Kamen to perhaps address it too, because this is kind of a critical question. From an investment point of view, it's a question from Brian Unit, who's a labor attorney down in Southern California. And we're glad you're with us, Brian. From an investment point of view, Irina, how much of a factor or deterrent is requiring union or prevailing wage scales for jobs going to be a factor? I mean, what about, this argument that we often hear, fossil fuel workers have this very robust pay and benefits package, and renewable energy workers often don't enjoy the same kinds of pay scale. Do you have any thoughts about that before I turn it over to Professor Kamen? I see he's nodding his head, but I want to give you a chance to respond.
Besides the fact that everyone should have access to a union and we need a better balance of power between workers and employers. That's good for the economy. That is good for the future of innovation. We should just have a better balance of power. Unions are part of that.
Good response. Thank you. Professor Kamen, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Sure. Well, already in California, while they are ununionized, which is a drawback that Irina highlighted, solar energy workers and workers in energy storage already make an average about $90,000 a year. Now, that's not as high as the $125,000 that's the fossil fuel average, but now you're comparing a unionized and ununionized workforces. And much of that fossil fuel profit is actually being fueled by environmental damages. If we were to include the social cost of carbon, if we were to continue to ramp up our in-state carbon prices, that would erode those values, and it would actually promote and benefit the clean energy job levels. And the other feature that's really critical here is that we've seen across California, across the country, that for every dollar invested, we generate 2 to 3 times more jobs in the clean energy space than in the fossil area. And so in terms of the value of the energy transition, the jobs equation is on the side of clean energy, not on the fossil fuel side.
Excellent. Thank you both for that. Here, I have another question, and Dan, and we're going to put this in the category of someone challenging our basic assumptions, and I think that that's very good, and I appreciate all the questions that are coming, and I encourage everyone to be robust in their thinking. Susanna Saunders says, the social cost of carbon was not factored into the CP regulation on solar. She suggests that you put a positive spin on that regulation, but says that disadvantaged and overpolluted communities that suffer most from oil and gas wells and fracking are not going to benefit. How is that equitable, she asks. Could you perhaps talk a little bit more about that CPUC regulation and what it is that we think is positive about it? If there's any weaknesses in it, what are they?
Yeah, no, she's absolutely right. It's not equitable. Right now, if you are in a fossil fuel, so-called a fence line or other highly polluted community, you generally are a renter, you're generally low income, and you're already suffering a very large environmental pollution burden. The proposed PUC ruling does not go anywhere near far enough to fix those features. It's much more focused on the narrow aspects of the rate equation. And I think that there's going to be a lot of negotiating around what are those numbers? What's the amount that you pay each month? And I saw there was a question in here, someone arguing that they shouldn't have to pay the $15 a month or whatever it is in terms of the cost that you would pay as your solar baseline number. The broader investment in clean energy, that our commitment to spending funds from the climate, the cap and trade money on underserved communities, that really is the pot of money that needs to go to those fence line communities. So I think that she's really exactly right on. There's much more that needs to be done.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Irene, I have a question for you from Ginny Madsen. She says we can't have business as usual. The sooner we understand this as society, as a state, and as individuals, the better. She says there's so much resistance to these ideas. So how do we change the way people think? This is kind of a meta question, right? How can we, what are the points that you make when you're in conversation with skeptical family members or colleagues or policymakers to help them understand this sort of fundamental shift that we're talking about?
That is a great question. And so, I am a math person. I do lots of math, but really a lot of times this forecasting stuff and this changing of minds comes down to stories. And the part that always surprises me is that when people are telling themselves stories about, I don't want to do this, I don't, want to change how I'm living my life, I think that the world should look like X. A lot of times they are thinking about something that's not actually going to happen. And they don't realize that business as usual is not tenable. And so walking them through, okay, you're assuming that this is going to happen, but you can see that things have changed. One of the exercises that I often do with students when I'm talking to them is to have them imagine how different their lives are from their grandparents. So their parents, they're mostly familiar and it's not that much of a change, but think about how different your lives are from your grandparents. So for example, one of my grandmothers had 8 children. One of them had 6 children. By the time they were my age, they were grandmothers. They spent the majority of their time canning and cleaning and looking after people and making sure that people were fed. And I don't do that. I like to cook, but it's not that I have to worry about feeding all of those mouths. So, things are different. We can change, and helping people see that through a narrative form is really important. I'm a huge fan of science fiction. So, for example, two recent books that I really liked, Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, also a Davisite. And I'm a huge fan of Neil Stephenson. He just wrote a book called Termination Shock, walking people through, okay, how are we all going to deal with this? So we each have that knowledge of the people that we love. We know what's going to make a difference for them. We sort of can have those conversations. So that's what I would suggest. Like, tell these stories and make sure that people understand that their assumptions might not actually be tenable.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. That was indeed an excellent question. And thank you for your thoughtful and very human response. I think it's important to remember as we get caught up in all these models and numbers and analysis, which can be so useful, that at the end of the day, it is stories that move people. So thank you for that. We do have time for a couple more questions. And Francis Lee is asking, Irina, if you type the names of the novels in the chat, some folks want to check those out. I have another question for Dan. Dan, if you're able. This is a question that comes up a lot. We hear it in the public narrative, and we hear it in the media, and it's something that I often encounter when I urge people to, accept this transition to clean transportation and a clean future. And if you're with us, Dan, the question is there a confidence that a ramp up in electrified transportation infrastructure, especially over the next 10 years, can be met from the supply side by clean energy? So I see Dan's camera's off. Maybe he stepped away. But Irina, I don't know if you have any thoughts on, do we have enough clean energy? And how are we going to provide enough clean energy to electrify everything?
That is a great question. The answer is a qualified yes. So we are going to have enough clean energy if we also do demand management. So I remember someone telling me that in Jerry Brown's first term, he apparently in the 70s went on this wild tear where he really, really wanted to increase efficiency in California, because he was worried that we were on this path of having to continually build more electricity generation. And so that moved the needle. That sort of curved that down so that there wasn't as much demand as they were doing a straight line forecast with. So if we want to assume that everyone is going to drive as much as they do right now and is going to drive an electric vehicle, that has implications for how much we have to mine in third world countries for batteries. That has implications for how much solar we need to do. But if we do it so that there's electrification of the transportation sector and demand management and avoided sort of trips, then we can probably get there.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point, that it's not just how much energy we make, but it's how we use and distribute it. And I see Dan nodding furiously over there under the Sather gate. Thank you, Irina. Dan, do you have anything to add to that comment? You see your camera's back on. I'd like to give you a chance to respond.
No, I think that's really the story. Well done. So. Excellent.
All right. Well, we have time for one more question. I'm going to take this question from Lisa Whitescarver, one of our supporters. I think it's a great question, Lisa, which is this. I think there can be a sense of disempowerment a lot. So this kind of comes down to policy, action. How can we make a difference? The question is, as a private citizen, is there something I can do to fight the oil and gas lobby? I think for a lot of people are like, oh, how do we provide a counterbalance to that really powerful force that's driving decisions both in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. What can we do as citizens? How can we have a meaningful voice in this conversation? That's Lisa's question. I think it's a great question. I'd like to give you each a chance to respond to that before we move on to our next panel. Irina, what are your thoughts about how we can come together to be a meaningful voice for policy?
Divest. Don't put your money into fossil fuel companies. Show up both for your elected officials and let them know that this is important to you and that they shouldn't be subsidizing it with our tax dollars or through the tax code to allow them to have business as usual, and also help yourself and other people organize your lives so that we don't have to use their products.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm noticing some of our attendees are dropping some useful thoughts into the chat also. To join together, Citizens Climate Lobby 350.org. Of course, endorse Climate Safe California. That's another way that you can help provide a counterbalance. Dan, what are your final thoughts on this?
I mean, I think Arena said a lot of them, but the other one is that the governor did commit during his campaign against the recall to move the climate neutral date forward to 2035. We have not yet seen the state plans for that. And I think that writing op-eds, calling your assembly men or women and senators, highlighting we want to see the details of those plans. For all of its warts, the recent work done by the PUC on this NEM is a start. It's not the full picture, no single action is, but indicating that you want to see the clearly articulated plan to get us to carbon neutrality earlier. That supports all of the policymakers, that supports groups like the Climate Center to be able to make the case that the voice and the vote is there, and that it's about climate and social justice. And you can't get to climate justice without social justice. You can't get to social justice without climate justice.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to you both for your thoughtful and meaningful comments, and I hope it's inspiring to everybody. I want to thank Sophia and Dave Shukla and Dave Kuhnhart and others who posted questions. I apologize we did not get a chance to answer all the questions during this conversation, but we do have several more amazing speakers, and we will have some time for more Q&A afterwards. So I'd like to invite our next speaker. I see Dan has turned on his camera. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Adler, Senior Advisor for Climate Finance, California's Office of Business and Economic Development, known as GoBiz. So Dan, what can you tell us about this important topic?
Thank you, Duran. Great to be with you all, and a pleasure to follow my esteemed colleagues. And let me say, before I jump in with a few slides, I heartily endorse the sentiments that have been expressed here about urgency and equity, inclusion. The perspective I'm bringing from GoBiz, which is not a function of state government that is often heard from in these conversations, is really about implementation. How do we get this stuff moving on the ground? What do we need to know about the realities of industrial transformation in California today so that we can move at the pace and scale we need to move? And I'm going to probe a little bit on what we're doing and how much progress we're making against our current goals, not because I don't believe we have to go faster. I've been in this movement, and it is a movement, for more than 2 decades. And the urgency now is to continue to prove that we can deliver on what we've committed to for the world as well as for California. So that's what GoBiz is all about, and that's what I want to share with you in the form of just a few slides here. So when we say maximizing the benefits of climate investment, I want to dig in a bit on what we've done to date, how the state is approaching this, and then pose some questions for us to wrestle with now and subsequently about how we do better going forward. The landscape of California's climate and energy policy priorities, is fair to say, is pretty complicated. So let me just lay out a few of the elements that I think are worth bearing in mind. We have our kind of regularly occurring exercises in the form of the climate scoping plan, designing the electricity system, pushing for 100% clean energy. Those are public, those are heavily regulated and legalistic. Strategies and approaches for the other elements of our economy and society that we need to transform, including our ZEB market development strategy, which GoBiz is leading. How do we accelerate progress to hit our 2035 or maybe sooner decarbonized transportation goals? Obviously, California's climate is changing fast with extremely damaging effects for health and economic well-being in the form of wildfire, among others. How does this integrate with our climate goals? Can we turn this into an asset in the form of both economic development and advanced energy products? Offshore wind, Dan Kemen mentioned the importance of this. Very difficult industry to accelerate growth of in an environment like California's Pacific Coast. What do we need to do in the form of industrial policy effectively to accelerate growth so that this is an asset that shows up in the timeframe we need it to? 2030 is coming fast for an industry like this. And lastly, on the transportation front and in the social equity and clean energy front, Lithium Valley is just an amazing opportunity down in Southern California for sustainably delivered inputs to the battery future, as well as geothermal power, as well as environmental remediation and community inclusion. But surrounding all of this, and of utmost importance, is just having a grid that can work. And I posted this governor's executive order from July, really highlighting the urgency of accelerating the development of clean energy solutions so that we have a stable grid. We cannot have rolling blackouts, not just because it matters for California's economy and our citizenry, but just think about what the signal is to the world, particularly the parts of the world and the parts of this country that don't believe this transition is possible. This is near the top of the priority list. And the more I spend looking at it, the more I'm convinced that we have to demonstrate that the grid is resilient, delivers clean power all the time. Yes, we have moments of incredible penetration of clean energy that should be celebrated, but it has to work every minute of the day for our economy, our society, and for the narrative around what California is doing. And that we have to have more clean power really fast to electrify all the things we need to electrify. So this is the balance that we're trying to strike as a state policy community. Even as we embrace the Justice 40 initiative and other equity mandates, we have to make sure that the system works for the narrative, for nothing else. So just a little bit on where the money's flowing, since this is notionally my mandate here, talking about where capital is. The cap and trade process and the investment process is very complex. It's fairly well established. It is a durable system now. It generated $3 billion of grant money just last year. Over the course of this program's life, run through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, there's an important link if I encourage you all to study how this program works and what it does for communities and what it could do more of. We've done 500,000 projects as a state with this capital. Last year, $8 billion total, and much more to come. At the same time, on the right, this is just a slice of venture capital investment. Where it's going, this is California's share. You see, last year, roughly 2019, was also $3 billion. That's the market's view of where the action is, so to speak, on investing in the technologies that are going to get us over the finish line. You'll see its share relative to the US, we're more than half. We need to continue to nurture that innovative marketplace, even as we push the benefits out to everybody. And what we don't have good data on, and I find this surprising having recently entered government, we don't track dollars at scale, meaning what are we investing in the large scale solutions that deliver clean energy and climate solutions with proven technology. We track venture because that's sort of, flashy thing for California to talk about. But what matters is scale. This is the decade of deployment. And we need to have better data. We need to understand how our policy environment links innovation and the private sector's support for it to the outcomes we need. And in the planning frame, make sure that everybody that needs to participate in how these systems and infrastructure investments show up in their communities is at the table, shaping the goals and delivery so that they have access to the benefits, not later, but right away. So a few points on sort of a singular achievement of California and its clean energy delivery. Dan Kamen gave you a version of this. This is the progression of California's RPS program. I had the privilege, the beginning of my career, to the left of this graph, I will say, in helping organize the original Renewable Portfolio Standard program at the CPUC. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is you see sort of trundling along on the left, not a lot of progress in the middle part of the last decade or 2 decades ago. And then a pretty steady bump up, and then we're starting to plateau again. These projects take years to develop. And in fact, it's not moving faster. In some respects, it's moving slower. And I want to close in a minute on why that is and what we need to do about it. The contracts that were started delivering power in the early 2010s were signed 5, 6, 7 years prior. And now you see we're effectively growing our renewable energy economy at about 1.5%, maybe 2% a year. We need to double that if we're going to stay on this upward trajectory on our current goals for clean power. And I'll say that clean power is the place where we're having probably the most success as a state in transforming our total economy. Long lead times, complicated planning, deeply tedious implementation details that really matter a great deal. So I'm just encourage everybody to take some portion of the passion that is put into the ethical arguments and the urgency arguments and hold government actors and private actors to account on getting this done and accelerating the pace of progress. Some ideas about why the RPS has worked on clear commitments, competitive opportunities, support for a range of technologies, clear pricing, strong commitments, durable, clear, stick to it and work through the hard issues. We need that same framework around all the other sectors we have to transform. So this is my last slide, and I want to focus in on what we mean by maximizing, in the sense of maximizing benefits. And these are questions. And I'll be honest that I'm in this role for about a year now. I've been in and out of government and private sector philanthropy and nonprofits. And coming in, it's refreshing to see the seriousness with which my state colleagues are taking these issues and aware of the urgency and the importance of California delivering. But these are questions. We don't have answers for many of these. Frankly, I would say any of them. Who are we maximizing benefits for? And when we look around, where do we see the best examples of inclusive planning that embed equity interest? There are examples of that at the community scale. There are more and more opportunities to do this well, from not even just the Build Back Better money, which unfortunately as of this morning is delayed until next year, but in the infrastructure commitments already made from the federal government, in the recovery already made, dollars that can bring communities to the table right now with durable commitments so that they're resourced to participate as partners. How do we make that just the law and the practice across the board? And where does this participation deliver tangible benefits? Not just the clean air from, or a healthier economy or a healthier climate 10 years from now, but earlier than that, and get at some of these legacy environmental and equity interests that we are very committed to, but we need some better theories about how to get it done. With whom? Who are we maximizing with? If we're serious about driving private capital commitments, how do we get the private capital aligned with us ethically so that we don't give over our moral principles in the process? This is a big business. California is a huge market. There's a lot of different types of capital providers that I really want to stress the importance of alignment from the beginning. If we're going to give them equity and upside and profit, let's make sure our morals are reflected from the beginning. And by when? There's no doubt that this urgency is profound, and we embrace that. We have to be clear-headed about where we are in each vertical, each sector that we have to transform, and hold each other to account. When there's a problem in getting a project over the finish line, I spend my days looking at individual projects that need to be online by next year to keep the grid up. Oftentimes it's communities that don't want it, local governments that don't know how to address it. How do we buy them in? How do we make sure that we get over this, what is evidently an implementation speed limit of some sort? How do we raise the pace of our execution? Do we need more incentives at the local level? Do we need more technical capacity provided by the state at the local level? If we don't solve this, we will have the same conversation next year, and most of our deployment lines will be flattening, I believe. So this is urgent. It's not glamorous, it's not sexy, but it goes directly to our ability to deliver on our commitments and make even more aggressive commitments consistent with the climate science. So thank you for the opportunity to share that. I don't want to be a downer, but this is, I believe, the reality of the industrial transformation in front of us.
Thank you, Dan. And an industrial transformation in front of us is exactly what we're looking at as we move towards a climate safe, clean future. It is going to take a lot of work. Thank you for asking those really relevant questions. I remind us to remember Irina's point. Remember, our grandparents' lives were very different from ours. My grandparents were born and raised in Baghdad and Amsterdam, respectively. Let's just say their world was a little different from the one I enjoy here in Sonoma County. And let's hope that our grandkids have a future as much better as we're enjoying versus 2 generations ago. And let's talk a little bit more about the for whom and with who, and what does investment need to look like to be equitable? And to address this, I'm very happy and proud to bring in Dr. Manuel Pastor, Distinguished Professor of Sociology and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Pastor. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, and please take your full 8 minutes. We'll catch up on the Q&A. So the floor is yours.
Great, good to be with you. And having grown up not in Amsterdam and Baghdad, but in La Puente, a place rife with auto body shops, lots of pollution from freeways and industry. The issue of equity in terms of environment and in terms of climate is a subject very dear to my heart. And what I really want to do in the 8 minutes that I have is explain a little bit why I think it should be dear to your heart as well, and why this is something that needs to be baked in, not sprinkled on to our plans to address climate. One key reason to think about it really from the get-go is basically political in terms of constituencies. For about the last 10 to 12 years, the Public Policy Institute of California has been polling Californians on their views about the environment and asking the question, is climate change an issue that is very important to you, that you think seriously threatens the quality of life and economic vitality of the state? And when asked that question pretty consistently over the last 10 or 12 years, about half of white Californians identify climate as a key issue. About 57 to 58% of Black and Asian Californians identify climate as an issue that's very serious, threatening our quality of life. And nearly 2/3 of Latinos identify this as an important and serious issue for them. Now, that's not what most people think in terms of environmental concerns, because frequently the image is given that communities of color, maybe low income, are going to prefer jobs over the environment. Interestingly, in the polls, there's no difference by ethnic group in terms of whether or not people think that addressing climate change will be economy generating or economy slowing. So it's really a function of people's attitudes, probably around pollution and the co-benefits from reducing our climate impact as well. So one reason to care about equity, strictly in terms of constituencies. If we deliver on equity, we cement key constituencies that are in favor of addressing climate change. Another reason is because when we protect the most vulnerable communities, we wind up protecting everyone else. There's the example, of course, of Hurricane Katrina, where the lower Ninth Ward wasn't fully protected. And because it wasn't, it flooded and then flooded the rest of the city. There's been research done looking at the relationship between environmental disparities and overall environmental pollution. And where the environmental disparities are the largest, the environmental pollution is also the largest. And some experimental economics using games in behavioral economics has demonstrated that essentially when you think that the worst impacts of climate are going to occur to someone else, you don't get as motivated to do something about it, both around the environment and around climate. So when climate equity is being addressed, it makes it more central. A final footnote on this is something that's really key for folks to realize. Often when we think about climate inequity, we think about it in terms of income, that it's a question of low income communities that might not have the resources to protect themselves against the worst impacts of climate change. Or when we look at the patterns of environmental disparities, that we might think that those are going to be in communities that are the lowest income, and as a result, low land values, low housing values. That's where noxious uses are going to cite. One clear thing you should understand about the environmental justice research is across almost any dimension, air quality, siting, and climate, the degree of disparity by race is more severe than the degree of disparity by income. That this is a reflection not just of the market locating noxious or climate risky uses to low-income communities, that it is a reflection of structural racism in terms of decision-making and power about where these kind of uses like freeways and other sorts of things go. So we can't just think that it's about the market. Markets are important. And we can't just think it's about the economy. It's also about racial disparities. So that's one of the reasons why my good friend Dan Kamen, as he's speaking, talked about social and racial justice as being central and not just economic justice. Finally, how do we measure these equity aspects? I want to suggest that it's around three different dimensions. One is being more specific about defining disadvantaged communities, being more specific about defining benefits, and creating new metrics of accountability. And I'll touch on all of those in the minute and a half I have left. I love Kellen virus screen. I've got to love it. It's kind of partly based on the environmental justice screening method that we came up with, which was a precursor. But the one gap in Callan virus screen is it does not have enough climate equity metrics in it as of now. And that's a clear frontier for the state to go in terms of developing an even better environmental justice tool that includes more climate metrics like riskiness with regard to wildfire or heat waves or a number of other things. We've done a little bit of development of those metrics. They should be built in. Second, so that's about defining disadvantaged communities. Second, how do we look at benefits? Frequently, and I'm so glad that Irena, when she was talking about it, lifted this up, Dan, as well. When you think about just transition, we're thinking about compensating those in the fossil fuel industries who may lose their jobs. Incredibly important to do. But how do we also create benefits for people who've been left behind and kept behind in terms of their access to labor markets and also in terms of their access to good air and clean environments? And then the last thing is developing metrics of accountability. And Dan is right. We spent a lot of money and we've achieved some really good benefits. But one of the things that we've been able to do with the greenhouse gas reduction funds is really tie it to making sure that the money is being spent in ways that benefit communities that have been labeled by the state as disadvantaged. How do we continue to create those metrics of accountability and make sure that we're holding the investments accountable to those standards? And I think, believe it or not, Doran, I just did that in 8 minutes.
Well, that's pretty impressive, I have to say. Thank you so much for your thoughtful comments and for packing so much into your comments there. We will be coming back to you and Dan Adler with some questions and conversation. Before we do that, though, I'd like to bring Jan Pepper into the conversation. Jan Pepper is the CEO of Peninsula Clean Energy. She's been wrestling with these issues for over 30 years. Many of you may know that the Climate Center was a big part of helping move CCAs forward here in California, community choice agencies, which is a perfect example. Back to your question earlier, Lisa, a lot of people said, oh, the IOUs will never stand for this. PG&E in Southern California Edison won't let it happen. But by working together in coalition, we were able to create community choice agencies, aggregation agencies all across the state, serving over 11 million Californians with 90% fossil fuel-free electricity. And one of those is Peninsula Clean Energy, and the CEO of Peninsula Clean Energy is Jan Pepper. So Jan, I'd like to give you a couple minutes to say a few things. I got a couple questions for you specifically before we move to a more general conversation. So I'd like to turn the mic over to you and welcome you into the conversation.
Thank you, Doran, and great to be here and join this very esteemed panel. And thank you to all the people who are listening today. So as Doran noted, we're the Community Choice Energy Program serving San Mateo County, and starting in April, we will be expanding to Los Banos in Merced County. So we replace PG&E as the generation provider. We source the electricity for our customers, and PG&E still delivers the energy over their poles and wires. And since our inception in 2016, Peninsula Clean Energy has pushed the boundaries in clean energy procurement and deployment to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is our mission of our organization, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our service area. So in 2016, when we started, we were delivering 50% renewable energy to our customers, which was 14 years ahead of California's goal of 50% renewable by 2030 at that time. And then we also set the goal in 2016 to procure 100% renewable energy by 2025. In 2017, we adopted a goal to deliver 100% renewable energy on a 24/7 basis by 2025, basically matching our renewable energy supply with our load every hour of every day to reduce the demand signal for fossil fuels from the grid. And now this year in 2021, we deliver 50% renewable and another 50% GHG-free electricity to our customers, which is 100% clean energy to the 300,000 accounts that we serve. We've also been committed since we started to not only cleaner and greener electricity, but also at lower rates. And since our inception, we have priced our electricity at 5% below what PG&E rates were. And we have saved our customers $70 million through 2020 by having these lower rates. So that's money that didn't go into PG&E's pockets. That's money that stayed in our customers' pockets that they could reinvest in their communities or however they so chose. And we've also done this while building a financially strong organization. We have 2 investment grade credit ratings. And so we've demonstrated that you can reduce GHG emissions and you can save consumers money at the same time. And if someone doesn't prioritize receiving cleaner electricity, certainly everyone is interested in saving money. So I've always believed that in order to enable widespread adoption of clean energy, it has to be at parity or less expensive than dirtier alternatives. And so that's the direction that we're going. How can we cost effectively deliver 100% renewable energy on a 24/7 basis by 2025?
That's great, and I'm really happy to have you in the conversation. You know, a lot of us are kind of looking at this from a statewide level. You're very granular. You're on the ground. You're actually doing it, and I think it's important to have voices like yours be part of these types of panels. Let me ask you a couple of questions before we bring the rest of the panel back in, and then we have an action item for everybody. So stick around because we've got some more exciting stuff still coming up. But let's focus for a moment on the 24/7 issue, Jan. And how do we get clean energy day and night? This addresses, Dan kind of looked at this a little earlier, but where's the power going to come from when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? How can we do that? I mean, I'm thinking about some comments from a former public official whose name we shall not mention, who talked about how, oh, this isn't possible, but you guys are doing it. How do you plan to do that day and night and provide clean energy for your customers?
So as we know, the sun shines during the day, typically. And so that will be what we're using during the daytime. The wind is often stronger at night. There's also baseload renewables like geothermal and biomass. And then we also add in energy storage. So we have both 4-hour energy storage, and we're looking at longer duration storage. And we're building a portfolio now of a mix of shorter and longer term resources. And so some of our contracting is short term, some of it is long term, so that as new technologies come available, such as offshore wind, we can build that into our portfolio and provide a mix that is available 24 hours a day. So it's possible to do it. There's other things too. There's also the demand side. So this is just the supply side, but there's also the demand side, working with folks who have electric vehicles and trying to encourage them to charge their cars during the afternoon and then have those cars available to provide resiliency and storage in the evening if we need it for their homes or for the grid. Also with rooftop solar owners to encourage them to add storage to their systems so that, again, we can shift the usage and the availability of additional resources so that we have a 24/7 availability for everyone.
Fantastic. I have one more question for you, Jan, and then I'd like to open this same question to the panel because I'm very curious what everyone else is going to say about this. So Peninsula Clean Energy has set ambitious and aggressive goals to get to all clean energy 24/7 by 2025. We applaud you for that. Can the state do the same? Can we do this from the Mexican border to the Oregon border, from Chula Vista to Crescent City, so to speak? Can the Golden State get there? What are the lessons you've learned at Peninsula Clean Energy that you would like to share with folks in other communities? Do you think it's possible, and what are the key metrics to get there?
Yes. Yeah, we think it's possible. So we're working on this right now. We're modeling this right now. We're actually using the same model that one of the other speakers noted this morning and adjusting it to make it more specific for what we're trying to do. But our load profile at Peninsula Clean Energy is pretty similar in shape to the system-wide profile in the state. So we believe that if we can achieve this goal, it will demonstrate that this approach is scalable statewide. And this is a model for other load serving entities to follow and can accelerate further reductions of greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity supply business. One of the things we need to get changed a little bit is on the policy side. We track renewable energy on a monthly basis. Renewable energy credits are issued monthly. We track renewable energy uses on an annual basis. And so we need to transition to tracking that on an hourly basis. And we're actually working closely with our state senator, Josh Becker, as he's looking at legislation to move the state in this direction. But certainly, the upside is that we can more quickly remove fossil fuel plants from the grid if we can get more and more folks on board to do this.
Wonderful, Jan. Dan, I see you, Cameron, I should say. I see you nodding your head furiously. I think you have something you'd like to add to this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what Jan said is really critical, that obviously thinking about power on a monthly or yearly average is crazy, given that this is now a dynamic thing where we're thinking about businesses and homeowners as prosumers, producers and consumers together. So averaging things out makes no sense. And in terms of, and that's really one of the things that better metering and that working with the utilities and the PUC can get us to. The other feature is that the amount of storage on the grid is clearly a function of both the price declines, but also policy. So in 2014, we passed the first law in the state that required the utilities to be able to provide 2% of their peak demand from energy storage. And it couldn't be pre-existing. It couldn't be pumped hydro and things we already had. It had to be new storage. That amounted to about 1.2 gigawatts of storage capacity in terms of the peak amount it could deliver. Just this year, we've had one new commercial plant, the Moss Landing Energy Plant, come online. And their goal is to do 1.6 gigawatts in one facility. And so that mixture of the technology evolution and the policy really allows California to think about meeting not only the day-to-day change in the demand, but also the longer seasonal, what's now called long duration storage. And so California is a leader in this. We need it, but it's also an incredibly important technology and business we can export around the country and the world. So there's a huge jobs benefit by being on the front end of this story, because everyone really needs to get to the climate and justice point that California is grappling with today. So pulling back or not accelerating is actually bad for jobs as well as bad for the climate and justice.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thanks. I'd like to move on to some other questions. There's so many, we've got so many great questions coming in. I really appreciate everyone's engagement on this. Dan Adler, I'd like to bring you back in because I got a couple questions. I'm going to kind of mush them together here for you here from Nicole and one from Kim. Nicole asks, could talk more about tracking investments at scale. What types of investments are the most important to track? And Kim asks, what role can small-scale distributed solar and storage play in meeting those needed investments? So can you talk a little bit about more the kind of investments you're talking about, and do small-scale solar and storage fit in there?
Yeah, well, the thing that I was speaking of specifically was really the sort of project level capital, meaning infrastructure, large scale deployments of, it could be generation, it could be storage, it could be ZEV infrastructure for charging and fueling. We just don't have a sort of a good grasp of who's capitalizing that. And I think it matters because we need a lot of it, but it also matters to know what's the cost of that capital, because the cost of capital is a movable thing based on who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with someone who's profit seeking and they've got an equity rate of return that they need to hit, we want to know that because that's going to cascade through the cost of these transformations and what it means for our society. We know there's a lot of rate pressure in the power sector right now, and that's hugely important for every purpose. So what do they expect for their money? We need to have some data on who the capital provider is. And to the point about disinvestment or divestment, if we know who's coming to invest, we can maybe connect it to the institutional investor community, the pensions, insurance companies that we need on our side for the long term. So it's sort of that transparency and the ability to arrange investment that I think is a social priority, not just sort of an afterthought. On the distributed front, I mean, absolutely, we've seen that in many venues right now, utility service territories, we're seeing 20 or 30% of generation coming from distributed systems. It works technically. It's got the benefits of the multi-points of failure that we talked about earlier. It's extremely empowering for communities and incites innovation. I don't think we have a good set of grid rules. I think the PUC decision illustrates the inherent tensions there, and I don't think we're done on that front. But I do feel like that we could be doing a lot more. And I think there's a social arrangement between the utilities investing in the distribution system of the future and being able to sort of run that business and grow on the basis of that clean business, that enables solutions at the grid edge that meet community needs and deploy distributed technologies at the same time. We're not in that conversation either, but I think we could be.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Pastor, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation. We're having several questions on this topic, on the topic you talked about. And I'm going to take one from Emma French, who's asking, how do we center equity within the existing institutional structures? And specifically, what sort of equity metrics would you recommend integrating into CalEnviroScreen? How can we make it better?
Great question. I want to start by saying, what a great panel. I feel so much smarter hanging out with y'all. And I'm sure that I will be borrowing what I learned today. And as usual, as an academic, the first time I mention something you said, I will credit you. The second time I will forget to credit you. And then the third time I will say, as I've long argued about distributed energy. I think that on the specifics, I think what we need to build into CalEnviroScreen is a little bit more stuff, well, on the neighborhood level, with regard to access to air conditioning, with regard to likelihood of heat waves, with regard to tree canopy. So a number of those kind of measures. I think the other thing that would probably be extraordinarily useful is to develop an occupational version of CalEnviroScreen. When you think about the risks that California farm workers are facing, and we don't have a way of kind of actively screening which kind of occupations are most risky as the, with regard to climate and also with regard to environmental conditions generally, as CalEnviroScreen addresses, I think that would be useful as well. I think there's a lot more that other great researchers and scientists would wind up coming up with if we recognize that what happened was that CalEnviroScreen was initially developed to look at environmental issues more generally, air pollution, proximity to hazards, and a number of the other metrics that are there, along with the measures of vulnerable communities. It happened to be on the shelf just as AB 32 was passing, just as SB 535 was requiring some measure of disadvantaged communities to put the resources in. And it's a great tool, but it wasn't specifically developed around climate. And I just think getting more scientists and community activists in the game to discuss what should be there would be useful in the years ahead.
Wonderful. Thanks. Irina, you turned off your mic. Means you got something to add. Go ahead.
So Manuel actually brought up this great point about occupations, and this made my brain go down a rabbit hole, which is, so when we think about farm workers and when we think about whether farm workers are vulnerable or not, and trying to figure out what that metric is, what is really important, I think, for all of us to remember is that a lot of the change that's going to happen comes on the how part. So for example, farm workers right now, the way they're run by their employers, maybe they're out in the middle of the day, maybe they're vulnerable to heat waves, maybe they don't have shade structures, maybe they don't have access to water, but you could also have farm worker employment be done in a much more worker-friendly way. And so whenever we're inventing these screens or these metrics or whatever, you want to be able to push things in the direction of, oh, something that I could change right now to make things better, rather than people should stay away from farm work. And that transfers to almost every occupation or everything that we do. That's part of Manuel's baking in rather than sprinkling on.
And I just want to add one thing to that point, if I might. It's also important to realize that we've got about 2.3 undocumented folks in California. And something interesting about that 2.3 million, 70% have been in the country for more than a decade. And they are matched by a number that is bigger of US-born family members who live with them, or US citizen family members who live with them, and green card holders. They're undocumented Californians. And when disasters strike, they frequently don't get they definitely don't get federal assistance. They may be scared of even accessing what state assistance is there. We need to recognize that this is an important part of California's workforce and communities and begin to design systems that are inclusive of those folks as well. They're not going anywhere. Neither are their families.
Beautiful, and thank you for speaking for those folks, Dr. Pastor. Very important and very well said. Janelle Perry agrees. Jan, really quickly before we turn to our very exciting action item that my colleague Nina will be sharing with you all. Jan, I just wanted to ask you one more question to kind of help wrap this up. You talk a lot about 24/7 clean energy, but we've centered equity in this conversation. In setting such an ambitious goal, what are your concerns about trade-offs with affordability? I mean, how are we going to make this accessible to all your customers and not just those who can afford it?
Yeah, that's key. And we're working really hard to make sure that we don't leave anyone behind in our programs. For example, we have an incentive program for low-income customers to upgrade their homes so that they can implement additional energy efficiency measures. We have a used EV program where we provide up to $4,000 for income qualified folks to buy a used EV. And we have a focus on DEAI in our organization right now: diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. So for example, if we have a program where the only way you can sign up for it is through an online portal, we need to change that. We need to make sure that people can call on the phone to sign up and use paper and pencil to participate. And then we're also focusing a lot on multi-unit dwellings, which is 50% of the housing stock in San Mateo County's multi-unit dwellings. A lot of low-income folks are in multi-unit dwellings, and working to get EV charging stations in that type of housing. But one of the other things that we're struggling with is when we talk about renters. How do you bring things to renters? And say for building electrification, they don't own their homes. So how do you get the landlords to upgrade those homes? Because they don't want to make investments in those properties. They just want to make as much money as they can. So they're not that, how do we get the right incentives to them so that it improves the life for their tenants? But, solar energy is less expensive than fossil fuels. That's when we put our RFOs out there, that's what we see. And so we believe that in the long run, certainly clean energy is going to be less expensive in the long run, and it's less expensive even right now. So it's just making sure that we get it out there and can be operating in a level playing field to make that happen.
Well, thank you for that, Jan, and thank you for being specific in your answers. We appreciate that. I know a lot of people who are on this call are interested in specific things that they can do. What can I do? How can I make a difference? How can we be part of this movement? And so I'd like to bring my colleague Nina Turner into the conversation. And Nina has something very specific you can do that she's going to share with you right now. So Nina, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Nina. I'm the Energy Program Coordinator here with the Climate Center. I just want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Showing up with us here today is one thing, but taking direct action is how we really make change. So if you haven't already, one action you can do is endorsing the Climate Safe California platform, which I've dropped the link in the chat to. But our second action today that we're going to ask you to take is sharing our latest report, which was co-authored by Dr. Kamen and Dr. Pastor, supporting Climate Safe California's urgent call on state leaders to take decisive action on climate change. Doing nothing or pursuing timid climate solutions will cost California trillions of dollars in destructive impacts to our economy, public health, equity, and way of life. Bold policy changes are critical to the pursuit of effective, equitable solutions. So in this report, you will find suggestions for aggressive yet achievable targets California can take for meaningful climate action. This includes adopting policies that align with the latest climate science, ensuring a just transition for workers and communities dependent on fossil fuel industries, and prioritizing climate-friendly investments in low-income communities and communities of color, while also ensuring their access to climate solutions. So the link to the report I will also drop in the chat. You'll see a button to download it to read through it. And on the side there, you'll see a social media share button. So please be sure to share this with your networks and download the report for yourself. And while you're doing that, I will pass it back to Duran to close us out today.
Thank you so much, Nina. And we appreciate those of you who have endorsed Climate Safe California. Most importantly, we appreciate you all for joining us here today. I'd like to take another moment to thank all of our sponsors, River City Bank, Summit State Bank, Y-Green, Blue Planet Energy, Terra Verde Energy, MCE, Willow Creek Wealth Management, and Peninsula Clean Energy. Going through that list of names of businesses and organizations, I'm impressed for a moment about the breadth of the movement that we've created here around Climate Safe California, and around, more importantly, creating a clean and prosperous future for ourselves, for our kids, and for our grandkids. I want to thank all of our speakers. Irina, thank you for reminding us to remember the grandmothers, very important. Manuel, for putting equity at the center of what we think and what we do. Dan, for the work you do in Sacramento every day. Professor Dan Kamen, for the work you do both at Berkeley and at the USAID, and Jan, for the work you do at Peninsula Clean Energy to actually help create these things that we're all talking about. It's really, really important that we do the things that we know need to be done. There's not a lot of time, so the urgency is upon us, and the time is now. I want to remind everybody that we'll be doing more of these webinars. We'll be diving into specific topics starting in January with the topic of mobility, and then moving on to some of the other specifics. We'll be talking about farmers, we'll be talking about workers. So those of you who ask questions about labor and about disadvantaged populations, we'll be getting much deeper into those topics through the course of this webinar series, Investing in Climate Action for Jobs, Health, and Equity. I want to thank our CEO, Ellie Cohen, who as always did a fabulous job kind of kicking us off and framing the whole conversation. And for all of the 120, 130 people who are here, we want to thank you all for joining us. We want to thank you most importantly for everything you do every day to make the world a little cleaner and a little greener. And with that, I know we're a couple minutes ahead, but I'm going to give you all a gift of 2.5 minutes of your day back. I want to thank all our speakers once again. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to all the attendees. And thank you for everybody. Yes, in a world that is cleaner, greener, and more just and more equitable. Thank you, Ellie. And thank you all for being here. Once again, my name is Duran. Thank you for coming to the Climate Center's webinar. We hope to see you at our next one. And thank you all to our speakers. You guys were all fantastic. We really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Take care.